Guruve Nama. My tribute to my Guru, Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. I first met Kapilaji when I was just 10.5 years old. She was my neighbor. An amazing institution builder, a scholar of Indian arts that linked archaeology, art history, numismatics, literature, painting, environment, ecology, and everything, languages, everything that we call culture, which he said was about geography and geographical responses. Dr. Vatsan came into my life and also became my affiliated guide for my PhD at the Jamia Millia University on Kathak dance and its ecology, where the main guide was Professor Narayani Gupta. As a neighbor, we would take walks, we would go to restaurants sometimes together, we would have our little fights. She was like my mother, a second mother, and she was also my teacher. The basic understanding of Kapilaji as a yogini was that she would create linkages, and that was her greatest asset and her aerial vision. So here she would look at, in one breath, talk about Mount Kailash with Mount Fuji, M.F. Hussein's work with that of Pablo Picasso. She would talk about Laban movement of modern dance and connect it with the Natya Shastra. She would talk about the Gita Govind as much she would talk about the critique of some other kind of paintings in the West. She would talk about Beethoven on one side and the work of Kumar Gandharv on the other side. She would talk about poetry of all kinds and link them up. She was a student of literature, but she had a lot of spunk. And there are many anecdotes which I hope to share gradually with you. But one of them, of course, is that she, even as she was passing away, she told me, "You always call at the wrong time." And she said she was at the age of 91, almost blind. She was out to go for a board meeting to the Indian International Center. Her idea of politics and art was that politics has to understand the nuances of culture. For that reason, she said, because each culture is affiliated to a certain geographical context. So if you do not understand the geographical context, then how can you understand the dynamics of power? That was her main thing. And then that kind of diversity has to be negotiated, she would say, and coexistence to become a reality. Every artist, every creative person, every human being is like a weaver, she would say. And you would need to understand all the lovely threads that come together in a multilingual language and are designed as weft and warps. And if you understand that, you know how much more about your environment, about India and the world. Here she was as comfortable as in UNESCO as she was in great conferences. She was honored by the Congress on Research in Dance in 2000 and as one of the greatest researchers on Indian dance and Indian arts and culture. And more and more, she formulated extremely far visionary institutions like the Indira Gandhi Center for the Arts, which she would tell me is like the Indian Smithsonian. And the way she would construct even the idea of bringing in how politics and culture can go for the actual benefit of man. And here she was saying the exile of His Holiness, the DalaiLama, who calls her his mother. By the way, she was so comfortable, and people would reach out to her, international scholars and spiritual leaders like the Shankaracharyas, the Sufi scholars of Kashmir, His Holiness, and so many other pontiffs would reach out to her. She was there for a religious conference in Cyprus as much she was in other debates and discourses. She lives behind a legacy, and she would say, India doesn't need so many troops on its vulnerable border. It needs governments to talk to the people on the margin. They are your permanent soldiers. Long live Kapila Vatsyayan.